Good afternoon, or should I say good evening, everyone. Radhika here, and on behalf of the team at Edelweiss and Edelweiss AMC, we are delighted that actually so many of you have joined us for another edition of the Connect webinar. We thought this time, and we've done a lot of these webinars where we've had Harshad, Dhaval, myself, talk about Indian markets, what's going on from a debt point of view, what's going on from an equity point of view, what's going on from a BAF point of view. But so much of what is happening in India is influenced by the world. We firmly believe that in times like this, you can't separate India from what is going on in the rest of the world. And sometimes I think for investors and advisors, it's very hard to make sense of so many variables that are moving in the world. What is happening to gold? Why has crude gone below zero? What is Donald Trump tweeting? Are markets away from reality? I mean, there's just so much to talk about. So today we thought we would take the opportunity to broadly talk about what's going on in the world. That's the theme of today's event. I'm delighted to have a speaker who we brought on popular demand, and that is Mr. Shiv Sehgal. Shiv is someone who's very well known, but I'm going to take the liberty of introducing him. So Shiv Sehgal is Deputy CEO, Edelweiss Global Investment Advisors. He is the leader and heads one of India's largest equity franchises. He runs a capital market business, which includes our well-known institutional equities business as well as our asset services business. He's been in the investment management and financial services business for 2 decades. Before this, he used to lead the institutional sales and trading business at Goldman Sachs, of course, a well-known global giant. And before joining Goldman Sachs, he was the CEO of Artha Capital in Singapore. A lot of experience working in long-short emerging market hedge funds in Sydney and Singapore. More than all this in the formal introduction, Shiv is outspoken, very candid with his views, and a reasonably entertaining speaker. So I'm really looking forward to hear him. The way we'll run this event is that Shiv will share some of his thoughts, and of course, coming from the research business, he has a lot of interesting data and insights. So he'll start by talking for about 30 minutes. As you guys know, there is a chat window. So after that, we will take all the questions. You can either put in your chat window questions right now as he's speaking or in the formal Q&A, and we'll try to take as many of them possible. With that, thank you so much, Shiv, for doing this. And I am sending you live right now. So thank you so much for doing this, and over to you.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Radhika, for the kind introduction. I think in the old world, I would have said, it's a privilege to be sharing the stage with you. But I think given the COVID world, it's apt to say that I'm privileged to be sharing screen time with you. And thank you everyone for joining in. I know it's a Friday evening post 5:30. Normally, hopefully, most of you would be having beers or a glass of wine. So I'll try and make the next 60 minutes eventful and insightful to the best of my abilities. And I do hope, as Radhika said, more than entertaining, it's more knowledgeable. And before I begin, right, just on the markets per se, I just want to clear out a few things in terms of the narrative at the moment, right? So it's very clear, given that the bounce back has happened in the markets since March, that the bulk of the deleveraging, the puke out in the equity markets that happened was a result of a bit of over leverage, margin calls, stop losses triggered, and all that transpired in March. Now we have a period of, in the next couple of, and I think we started that from May onwards, is that we are trying to get back to normalcy in the best possible way economies can. But the financial markets definitely are a beast of its own, as we can probably see in the narrative that even Radhika mentioned, right? I mean, they're running ahead of the curve to most people's kind of belief that we should be in a downturn economy and it will take time for things to revive. So the reality is that, there was definitely not only blood on the street. In my world, I would say that there was a complete total massacre in March, right? It, however, remains a complex situation, and there is not one variable that will fit the right kind of model right now. There's no right real solution. Bear market rallies are equally voracious, and the volatility that we saw in March has abated, whether you look at from the global VIX or from an India VIX going from like 85 to now, kind of stabilizing at 30. But I think from an economic point of view, while we are not out of the woods, the financial markets are extrapolating that there might be a V-shaped recovery. Whether that happens or not is a narrative that we all need to form a thesis around. But so far, I think the policy response from the central banks has proved to the merit that they wanted to achieve. Right? Basically, what we had was a liquidity crisis, and they didn't want to turn into a insolvency crisis. And it seems to me that so far they have avoided that pain. However, before we discuss more in detail, I just want to lay out the narrative that from a pure investor perspective, as in any crisis, we can be distracted by the short-term volatility and the market noise. But in reality, irrespective of which stage of the investment cycle you're in, and this has been proven, from every market guru out there, that the most important thing is your strategic asset allocation that matters along with tactical shifts around it, right? So in that view, I think it was kind of, not obvious in March, but given that the massacre and what the market was kind of showing at that point of time in terms of prices, Nifty going from 12,400 to almost 7,500, it seemed that, it was time to slowly increase exposure. And, in hindsight, during the panic, it never seems like that. But the reality is that if you start nibbling in a staggered manner, I think you will always benefit. So you never know when the bottom is. Maybe the Nifty starts, probably correcting or giving back some of the pullback as I speak on a bullish note. But the reality is that no market guru, irrespective, can time that. What you can time is your exposure allocations and your asset allocations. So I think from a market perspective, there are attractive valuations in quality stocks, given that, just a few months back, Nifty was almost 20% higher or 15% higher from here. Some of the stocks were almost 30-40% higher. There has been a forceful bazooka policy response from the central banks across the world and the forward-looking nature of equities. So the reality is that, markets are already wiped out, I would say, the next 2-3 quarters of growth. Nobody's looking at financial March 2021 earnings. What we are factoring in from market participants, especially from the institutional world, is how will FY 2022 look? Will we have a snapback GDP back to 6, 7, 8%, or corporate profitability will go up? And if you can form a thesis surrounding those investment philosophies, right, you will be able to form an asset allocation strategy that invests according to your horizon, right? So going back to March, right, I think for this particular audience, it's also kind of important to understand the kind of puke out that happened was also extremely fast, right? Usually what has happened in prior economic downturns is that there has been a cataclysmic event, and slowly over a few months, we see the narrative change from a bull market to a kind of a bear market thesis. In this time around, the down spiral that happened in markets was extremely fast. No one could react to it. And the reality is that I think the response from central banks has also been, in my view, and I think I've said it in a public forum recently as well, that March 2020 will probably go down as the biggest stimulus bonanza that markets got ever in the history of financial capitalism, right? If you think about what the Fed did, they increased in 6 weeks. And I would like to actually share some charts here before I start. Hold on one second. Let me just get this right. Sorry, Radhika, can you see that?
What we are going to do, Shiv, is we're just going to take the charts live. 1 second.
Yeah, please. Perfect.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So if I can just show you this chart, right? You can see that the Fed basically in 6 weeks increased, and this is a stat that probably all of you know, right? Everybody's talking about it. Fed balance sheet has gone from almost 2.5 trillion to almost 7 trillion as we speak, and that is a phenomenal number. India's GDP is what Fed pumped in those 6 weeks. We are at 2.2 to 2.5 trillion GDP, and this is not only the Fed. We had the ECB pumping in money. We had the Bank of Japan pumping in money. The only one that has not pumped in, and I think it's probably about lagging a few months. And I think you will see some stimulus measures from China is my view as well. So basically, you have all the major central banks in the world pumping in a lot of liquidity in the markets. And what happened as a result of that, right? you have a massive 6x jump during COVID in terms of treasury supply that you can see in this chart, right? And there are similar charts to this, and this just shows you what the response was in the Great Lockdown, as we call it, versus the Great Recession and the Great Depression, right? So these are uncharted territories. This is, and the word that has been used the most is unprecedented. I would rather use the word unparalleled, the response that what we have got from a global perspective, right? And to give you the more simplistic narrative as to what happened in March, right? And I don't think people everyone knows, yes, there was an equity sell-off, right? Why did it happen? I think a lot of retail players don't understand that. So if I can just give you a narrative as to what happened and what transpired, especially in the US in March, that led to this crazy sell-off, was that and before I come to this chart, right? I mean, let me just explain to you what a normal asset allocation looks like. So what happens is, if you were a portfolio manager or an individual investor, you would have, depending on your age profile, a 60% equity or 40% bond allocation, right? And the reality is that, so what happens is, when your equity market portfolio goes down, the asset allocation moves away from equity into bonds. And what happens is, bond prices go up, but bond prices are inversely related to yield, right? So while you're getting a mark-to-market loss in your equities, you get a mark-to-market gain in your bond portfolios, right? So now what happened was, most of the institutional quant and relative value funds and a lot of the larger institutions, what they do is they try and overlay, in terms of panic or risk of events, they leverage their 40% of the bond portfolio to mitigate that loss that they're having in their equity portfolios, right? Now, what happened in the initial sell-off, right? And I'd like to give some dates here. On 19th of Feb, when the S&P started selling off, the equity market was going down, but treasury yields, right, which is on the bottom of the chart, as you can see, went from 1.5% to almost 30 bips, which was a normal reaction. You had equity market selling off, you had bond markets selling off in terms of treasury yields going low and bond prices going up. But something crazy happens on the March of 9th. And if I recollect, on the 3rd of March, is when Fed cut that humongous 50 basis and 75 basis points of rates as well. Now, the initial part of the sell-off was very normal, right? But what the crazy thing that happened in the market was the fact that from 9th of March till the 23rd of March, while your equity portfolios continued to de-risk and see losses, the treasury yields from a US 10-year perspective went from 30 bips to almost 1.25%. So what happened was, to all these fund institutions who had levered their bond portfolios, they were losing money on their equity portfolio and they were losing money on their bond portfolio. Now, this negative correlation had kind of broken down. And this is what caused the kind of panic and absolute mayhem. There was not a single asset class that during this 2-week period or 3-week period did not see losses, right? Usually what transpires is that your risky assets lose money, but your safe assets go up in price. But during this 3-week period, it didn't matter whether you were in just credit, government bonds, safe treasuries, whether it was JGB, Swiss franc, yen, gold. Yeah, you can go back to the 3-week period and every asset class, I think Nifty was down almost like 40% and S&Ps were down at the peak 35%. But when the Fed realized this, they started pumping in liquidity, right? And this is exactly the opposite of what happened during 1929 depression, when the Fed and the central banks were too late to react. And what happened during the Great Depression was that a liquidity crisis turned into be an insolvency crisis, right? So what they did by pumping in literally, I think from 23rd March till the last day of March, they were pumping in almost $75 billion from the Fed and treasuries into the market. And this stabilized the yields market, right? So if you look at in the bottom chart, left corner, 10-year treasuries, from about 9th of March at the bottom, they went up back to about 1%. And this gave gains in the bond portfolio markets. And hence, we kind of started seeing stabilization in terms of the narrative in the equity markets from April onwards. So I hope that was a clear narrative as to what has transpired in March. And I think it's, for me, looking at yields in any sell-off from a US perspective, the bond markets never kind of lie, unless the US, which they have said that they will start putting in yield control, YCC, which is the yield control curve control. Unless that happens, the bond markets are a good narrative to see as to how the macro world is viewing the world. And this is exactly what transpired. Now, as a result of this, right?
Quick request, you just do full screen on your screen. There's a little request if you could just hit view full screen.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me get that straight. View page display. Actual size, zoom to page level. Sorry.
There's a full screen, I think.
Wait, let me get 100%.
No. There's a view
Is that
full
better?
screen. There's a view full screen in PDF.
Yeah, I see it. Okay, now.
There. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry, just 1 second. Okay, sorry. Now, if you look at this, right, from a narrative, just not only from the monetary perspective, but even from the fiscal perspective, right? This is the first time we are seeing, and the Congress is already talking about the 5th stimulus bill, which is going to be an infrastructure bill, which is going to be $1 trillion. So similar to what China did in the early 2000s, we are having a monetary stimulus and a fiscal stimulus from the Fed. But we are also seeing a similar trend from the ECB as well. And I think, and the BOJ in tandem with that is going to provide a tremendous amount of liquidity and money supply that is going to come into the world. So if you look at this chart, the US money supply growth is at a 60-year high, which is really phenomenal, right? And same narrative in, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but also, sorry, on this page, it's kind of interesting to see that US personal incomes have got a fiscal boost. So 2 things important here. One is the Fed gave a one-off $1,200 paycheck in April to all families and individuals in the US. And what has also happened post that is on an every week basis, the PPP program is almost giving $600 to all the unemployed people, which as of now is supposed to expire on 31st of July. So I would watch that date very carefully. There is chatter amongst the Fed banks and the US Congress that they might extend that. It seems to me that that will be very unlikely, right? So US personal incomes getting a fiscal boost is also kind of showing in, everybody who's following the US retail market, you are at the moment seeing that Robinhood's, the trading accounts have gone berserk, and a lot of this money, the paychecks, so if you're in the US, you're not only earning your day wage from a salary or a job perspective, but you're also getting a paycheck from the federal government that's hitting your bank accounts. And a lot of that money is getting finding its way into the equity markets, and that's kind of evident in terms of what the S&P and the Nasdaq have done. So saving rates of the charts across the global, right? There's a lot of pent up demand, and this is not only in the US. I think post GFC post COVID, that's been a sharp. If you see this right hand chart, US households are sitting on record savings. A lot of that money. In any panic situation, the first kind of impact is that everyone kind of hoards cash, right? And that is exactly what's happened and transpired in the US. But a lot of this financial market participants are saying is that if the economy were to show green shoots in the next couple of months, a lot of this financial savings will also find its way into asset classes. Now you can take and pick and choose whether it's gold or whether it's technology, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever it may be, right? But it will find its way into wherever is the best risk reward parity. If I were to just kind of continue with that same theme, and we go to the next chart. So in terms of the markets narrative, as I said, I think for me, the US supply growth is very, very important, right? I don't want to harp on this issue, but more importantly, for any investment thesis that, especially from an institutional world, people have, the first question when you form a narrative on asset allocation is, what is the view on the US dollar? So US dollar saw a massive kind of spike as the panic happened. And that is what we call in investment world is the US dollar shortage. And in periods of risk aversion, that creates a rush for dollars because the rollover of debt becomes extremely difficult, especially for emerging markets, as it faces both currency mismatches and liabilities in dollar and cash flow in local currency terms as their economies kind of get hit from an economic standpoint of view. So what we have had is March, April, May, we have seen the US dollar spike up, but as the Fed pumps in more money, there is also a narrative that there is a limit to how much you can print, irrespective whether you can be the reserve currency. And there is another school of thought which, I think, throwing another stat out there, that if you look back from the 1400s, right, an average reserve currency has lasted a regime of 75 years to about 125 years. Now, USD became FX reserve currency in the 1920s. We are almost at 100 years. In my view, if I had to take a long-term bet, I say in the next 10 years, that tectonic shift might happen, that not only the USD will devalue in the next decade, but you will see an emergence of another foreign currency. But that's probably a theme from 2025 onwards. And the short term, I think at the moment, there is a 6 to 9 month pain trade where you could see bouts of spike of volatility in the USD. But I think the bulk of the carnage is behind us, right? And also what's important is that as the Fed prints this kind of money, the fact is that the deficit is so high that they cannot afford to have interest rates creep up, because that would put an extra burden. So hence that risk parity to have that, yes, US Treasury yields were having against the Europe or Japan, or especially against the emerging currencies as well, becomes disproportionately in favor of EMs in the next decade, right? And I think that on one of my themes also is that maybe 12, 18 months down the line, I think emerging markets will again become the darlings. Emerging markets have been out of favor for almost more than a decade, right? Any investment thesis for more than a decade always has its way back. And I think we are approaching that kind of levels as well. So if I were to kind of move forward, this is starting to weigh on the dollar. The dollar is now, as you can see from this chart, from the beginning of May, we are starting to see the DXY come off a bit. It's not kind of that relevant to me yet, but I think as we move to the end of this year, I would watch these levels very clearly. And I would also watch any spike on the euro above 116, 117. That would tell me that this thesis is kind of correct. So as I said, the investment implications from global allocators on the USD thesis is very important. So if they take this view, the amount of money that will get formed into other asset geographies is also very significant from a pure asset allocation point of view. As I said, the dollar devaluation should also see a broadening of this rally, right? So far, it's been a very concentration in terms of the top 10 market cap stocks globally, right? Especially in the US. I'm going to talk a bit about that later as well, so I don't want to spend too much time here. But the reality is, as the US dollar narrative shifts from strength to weakness, you are going to see equity rallies, also kind of the polarization that we're seeing in large caps becoming disproportionately as a percentage of the pie. You will see that lift into the broader markets. And we're probably seeing that in the last probably last 2 weeks in terms of the S&Ps versus the Russell 2000 from a global perspective. And even today, I think, last 2-3 days, the mid caps have made a decent comeback in India as well. Moving on, as I said, EMs outperforming the DMs. That's very clear as the devaluation kind of continues for the US dollar. Spending some time on gold, irrespective of your thesis, whether the US dollar strengthens or weakens, I think gold is an asset class that is a winner just because of the printing in global central banks. Gold has been an outperformer, and this is the chart. And for everyone listening into the webinar, I'm sure Radhika and team can send out these charts to you, and you can study them in detail. We'll be happy to kind of share them as well. So the reality is, in the 2000s, gold went up by 5x. In the 1970s, it went up by 15x. If you see those two pink bars, I think we are about to enter another significant gold outperformance in this decade as well. And same thesis here, Ganj just putting in a different perspective. Gold has been the undisputed winner in terms of S&Ps versus treasury markets and MSCI All World Index, right? So this is taking it from 2000. So gold has outperformed every other asset class. Moving on, I think this is a very important chart. If you look at this, so this is the Barron's Gold Mining Index. If you look at that red bar, this is the current bull market, and the previous time frames show you what gold did. So from my perspective, even though while gold has gone up from 1500 to 1720 or 1730 as we speak, I think the bulk of the move is about to happen in the next 2 years. And I think the best way of owning that would be, some gold ETFs with gold miners exposure from a global perspective. Coming to this chart, I think this is a really important chart for me. And we just talked about this, the concentration of the larger top 10 names or top 5 names globally. So if you look at this chart, the top 5 names at the moment are about 22% of the S&Ps, and that's about versus 18% in the tech boom. And it's very important to understand the narrative what has happened here, right? And what's happened is about 5-6 years back, passive money index funds started to see a lot of inflow because of the fact that active money managers that had a kind of I would say a tepid from 2010 to 2015, they were not being able to beat the index that much, and they were charging 2 and 20 in our hedge fund parlous world. What means is they were charging 2% management fee and 20% outperformance fee, right? So most pension allocators in the US and the largest sovereign wealth funds said that I'll keep a portion of it in active funds, but I will start moving into passive funds, which are charging a lot less. And that, when we say passive, that's the ETFs of the world. Now, this tectonic shift that happened about 5, 6, 7 years back was kind of significant in terms of how the money flow happened into equity markets in particular. So passive strategies today now control 60% of US equity assets. And if I were to add quant funds, that's another 20%. So you're looking at a staggering 80% combined of daily volumes that are going into passive strategies, right? And the two biggest asset allocators in that regard are BlackRock and Vanguard. And if you just see their AUM amount they control, just 5 years back, that was about $8 trillion. Today, they control north of $13 trillion, right? And that is, there is no asset class or on an allocation perspective that has seen this kind of growth in markets which have been kind of tepid for the last 5-6 years. And give you another stat, August of 2019, I remember reading a report last year where for the first time passive index funds took over actively managed funds in the history of financial markets. So those are kind of important, I think barometers in terms of what's happened in terms of global money supply. And if you were to think about, this 13 trillion versus the fact that US GDP today on an annual basis is $20 trillion, it just puts things into perspective. In terms of my narrative, this is an important chart. I think emerging markets relative to the S&P 500. If you look at this chart, it's very clear that from 2010 till 2020, S&Ps have been on a secular upward spiral versus the emerging markets. And hence my thesis that we are about to enter a phase from Jan 21 or maybe in the next couple of months where USD will probably see a devaluation is probably a stronger word, but weakness, which will correlate to exports being driven from emerging markets yet again. And I think this chart is probably screaming buy for EMs, whether that happens in the next few months or maybe in a year or 18 months. But I think the next decade is out for emerging markets outperformance. This is an important barometer. You can check it out. You can just go to Google from a retail perspective, or you can go to Bloomberg or any other stat. The reason I bring this up is that for me, the put call ratio in the US is very asymptomatic in terms of what is the institutional world thinking and what the investor sentiment is. So anything on the top that shows you that in mid of March, we were at a fear index when people were writing puts left, right, and center. And at the bottom of the chart is your, when markets get oversold and people start getting back into calls. And just for terminology's sake, there is no other alternative because equity risk premiums are screaming buy. Foremost fear of missing out from a rally. I'm sure a lot of us have missed out in this particular rally from Nifty from 7,500 back to like 10,000. And from an institutional perspective, that's the term that everyone uses in terms of portfolio managers. Maybe I shouldn't have put it here given Radhika is listening, but that's the fear of getting fired from an institutional perspective if you lag the index and your peers. But Radhika doesn't have that problem, so that's fine. Moving on, again, Radhika talked about the important event that we are about to have from a US election perspective. This chart shows you what the betting market in the US is talking about, right? So your blue line is the Biden, which is the Democrats, and the yellow line or the orange line rather is the Trump. Now, unfortunately, the George Floyd event in the US last couple of weeks, as you can see, there's a massive, they were kind of neck to neck, but Biden just taken the lead here going up to 62% versus 45% for Trump. There are serious implications here. I think market is not pricing in just yet. It's just one spike. But as we get closer to September, October, and if Biden is still showing up in the polls as a leading candidate, I think I would be worrying some from a short-term perspective or a blip in the US markets, just from the fact that at the moment, Trump and his policies are very conducive to markets. Giving an example, corporate US world or corporate companies in US at the moment, because of the benefits that Trump administration has put, are paying about 10% corporate tax. And Biden has already talked about in his policies that jacking that up to 30%. So I would, watch this space very closely as the narrative unfolds. Coming to India, I'm sure a lot of previous speakers have spoken on in terms of markets from an India perspective. And while I was supposed to talk on global markets, and I'm happy to chat in the Q&A slide, but I just thought I'll spend 2 minutes on it, given that my 30 minutes are almost over. But just from an India perspective, I think from a policy response, India has been kind of tepid. I think markets and market participants were hoping for a larger stimulus, given that the RBI has such a large war chest to deploy, and the fact that we were going through one of the largest economic downturns. I'm sure none of us in our lifetimes will see a negative GDP print that we're about to print. So I think the narrative warranted a very aggressive policy stance from the government and the RBI. We have got some. I think there is enough room from RBI to get yields much lower. And from an India perspective, I thought, just before I talk a little bit more on the policy front, on this chart, right? It's really interesting when I was looking at some data. While I spoke earlier that gold has been a complete outperformer for most of asset classes and developed markets indices, it's really interesting that from an India perspective, from data from March 2003 shows that Nifty has shown a CAGR of north of 15% versus gold of 12%, right? So that just shows that you are far better off in India in investing in equity markets, especially if I were to show you the next slide, which is this. Large returns are made at the initial stages of the cycle. No, I'm not saying that this is the start of a bull cycle, but at Nifty at around 7,500, 8,000, 8,200, 8,500, I think dipping your toes in a staggered manner over the next couple of months. And should we, get a V-shaped recovery, which I doubt, but there is a narrative getting formed that the reopening of the economies, especially if Europe is concerned, there could be a thesis formed that things will snap back to reality far sooner than at least, people who are closer to the market, such as myself, have been skeptical. And the reality is that, financial markets are extrapolating, as I said, what is going to transpire next 18 to 24 months. They're not looking at what's going to transpire in the next 6 to 9 months, right? So earnings are a washout for the next 2 quarters. Don't get disheartened with GDP prints and, car sales of zero as the financial press would show in the next couple of months, right? Just one more thought. India's economy was already weak. We have already had the NBFC crisis from, I think, 2018 onwards, when I think the mid-cap index, peaked in January. We have had a very, our corporate profitability in India and company has gone from 6% to 2.5%, which is multi-decade lows. We are having issues from a tax revenue growth perspective, and I think that's the reason the government was kind of very, I would say, prudent on the fiscal side. I would have expected and hoped that they were not, but that's the reality. They do have a war chest that they can still deploy should things get worse. So I think, we have already taken the underperformance in the last couple of quarters, and I think the way forward, irrespective of the narrative, how US goes from here, while at the moment we are, every day, I think most portfolio managers come in and the way the world is, you look at what happens in the S&Ps and that's getting extrapolated the world over. I think as we move into the next 2-3 quarters, that high correlation will move away, right? So as I said, monetary policy has still got a way to go. And I think Indian rates will move lower, which also make the cases that, your FDs and your debt markets will give you a much lower return compared to the equity risk premium that I foresee if you were to invest with a 1 to 3 year horizon. in the foreseeable future. Indian markets from a valuation perspective, I'm sure you've already seen these charts, but from a GDP perspective, Indian market cap is probably, at again a reasonable level compared to where we were just a couple of months back. Dollar devaluation, I've already spoken, and from export point of view, I think there's a lot of chatter at the moment that, this is the first time in history I have seen in my trading career such a negative narrative against one single country, which is the anti-China slogan. We have an opportunity here in India, which every market participant has come out and said in every webinar, from an India opportunity perspective. Yes, there's been a crisis, but if we have the political, the entrepreneurial, and the technology will that can translate into winning manufacturing mind share and implementation and execution, this challenge will be definitely rewarded into an opportunity. How we transform that is still a very big question mark, but there are a lot of options available to us, right? Rather than saying anti-China, we will not buy China, I would assume that if we were to just put a higher tax or a higher import duty on China, the government gets, tax revenue, and our capability and our companies and our industry manufacturing base becomes more efficient. We have this opportunity for the next couple of years. Whether we can bank on it and we don't kind of let this opportunity slip by will be a good question mark and a thesis that I kind of grapple with from a daily perspective. But yes, it is going to be important. The dollar weakness will help our exports. That's been my thesis, and that's kind of the conclusion from a pure narrative from a market perspective. I don't want to take too much time. These slides will be available to everyone. So with that, I will stop sharing and happy to take questions. Sorry, I tried to put in as much as I could in 30 minutes.
No, you actually packed quite a punch, and we have actually an extraordinarily large turnout for a Friday evening. Yeah. So we have about 400 people.
My kids just opened the door and it's like all the water's coming in.
Okay. No, so we have an extraordinarily large 400 people watching in on a Friday evening, which is pretty exceptional. And so I'm going to start throwing some of the questions at you. So the first one is that you've talked about the disconnect between fundamentals and markets. How long do you think it will last, and what are the factors to understand to see that the market is now moving in line with fundamentals? So I think the second question is very interesting. What would the factors that you would watch be?
So I think today morning only somebody sent me a WhatsApp, right? And I'm sure people in the market would have got it. I think it's Warren Buffett's quote, right? If you think you've got the economy right and your thesis right, doesn't mean you'll make money in the markets, right? And that is exactly the narrative right now. What is happening is markets are factoring in two things. As I said, the amount of stimulus that has happened from a developed market perspective, and also the fact that we don't know how earnings will shape up in the next 2-3 quarters. Is it a dip that is only going to show for a couple of months? Or is it also the fact that consumer investment behavior has moved? Is it that people will work from home for a longer period of time? From an India perspective, I'm talking about, right? Or we also have a mix of balance where, yes, maybe 10 or 20% of the workforce works from home, but 80% of the people still kind of, find that enjoyment in going to office and the productivity is higher. Or, it's just the camaraderie of having all people together is a thesis. So commercial real estate does not take the hit that people are envisaging it will. In terms of fundamentals coming back, I think in the last couple of years, it has been, that's the reason active managers have kind of struggled, because the narrative has moved from figuring out the flow of money. And as a result, the large caps have been disproportionately been at an advantage versus, if you look at any industry, the market leader is gaining in, there are a lot of stats around that. In every industry, in the top 2 gain about 70% of the profit share or revenue share versus the bottom 30%, right? And that's a very important metric in India. So for me, the more important, and someone asked me this question, how do we solve this issue? I think for any economy to transfer from a developing or emerging market to a developed market, something like the US that people would transpire or aspire to, it is very important that you have institutions that are large enough that can build a thesis around the fact that irrespective of the government in power, they can continue to grow. Because you only grow, the economy only grows and the wealth only grows when you have compounded growth. And that the thesis of that is built around strong institutions that a country builds. Right. So for me, that is very important. And unfortunately, in India, we have not been able to disperse or have a larger pie of these large institutions that we can compare even today versus China.
Shiv, the second question I have is that you talked about gold, but can you talk about commodity sector more broadly, especially lower oil prices, the implication? In fact, there was a specific question on some of the commodity heavy countries and the outlook on some of the countries there. But if you can talk about commodities ex gold.
Sure. So let me take it one by one. So copper is it's been I think in macro world, copper is your barometer of where the economy is going, right? Having said that, it's very important to understand in the 2000s, we had China growing from, a 2% market share to almost 20 to 25% of world GDP, right? And as a result, and the infrastructure that they built in China also was the fact that economies like Scandinavia and Brazil and Russia and Australia, right? And I was in Australia during the commodities boom in the early 2000s, and I saw firsthand the kind of wealth that created. And the mining companies, in Perth area, you were seeing prices of the charts, right? All you had to do was throw a dart and the stock would be up almost 3x or 5x in about 6 months or 9 months. So that was a bull market. The narrative of that is, China is not growing at 10-12% GDP at the moment. They're probably growing at 4-5%. So commodities as a flavor went away, right? We have also seen that as the thesis forms that when commodity boom was happening, everybody wanted to go and buy a mine and start mining iron ore or copper or zinc or any of the other metals. We have also seen a world post that there was an over supply as prices peak. Now commodities per se are very different, right? I mean, as the price goes higher, right, you kind of, in the interest for suppliers to get into the business becomes more and more. But as the price falls, you see a lot of people leaving the industry because the profit margins just shrink, right? So in the commodity parlance, given the fact that we have seen now about a few years or almost a decade worth of a slow grind, I think we are probably 2 years away from. So all this stimulus is probably going to show up in inflation, but that is not going to show up in inflation because at the moment we're fighting deflation, right? Because there is no growth. And that narrative will probably lead to a commodity bull market, but I would say that's probably a Jan 23 story, right? At the moment, market participants are grappling with, is there going to be enough demand to even get back to the normal, right? And while economies are opening up, I think capacity utilization in most of the developed world has only come back to like 30-40% of pre-COVID levels, right? So that's the kind of metrics I would be looking at. Just in terms of oil, and you mentioned what is the thesis around the larger economies. I think Saudi Arabia, from that perspective, is in a bit of a, if I can use the right word, bother. And I would say that Russia has been a phenomenal country the last 4 or 5 years. They have put in a lot of fiscal prudence. I love their central bank governor. She's done a phenomenal job in putting the ruble was completely linked to the oil price, right? But over the last 5 years, given the implementation that Russia has done, I think they are in a far better economy today to withstand lower oil prices far longer than any other oil producing nation. The shale oil gas is a narrative that is probably going to provide a lot of bankruptcies. Oil below 35 basically means that shale oil is bankrupt, right? At the moment, with oil back at 35-40, you're going to see a lot of consolidation in that space. But if oil dips back to below 30 or 25 and it stays there, I think this liquidity crisis in the US will result into insolvency crisis for a lot of these oil producers. But oil above 40 is what we would need for, yes, oil at a, we are negatively correlated. So oil at $10 is a massive benefit, but you must understand if oil is at $10, that means there is no world growth as well. So that doesn't help anybody. We need a certain amount of growth, even though a higher oil price could would hurt us. But I don't think, my thesis is that oil probably stagnates within the $30 to $50 range in the foreseeable future. And I would be happy to kind of, let your market participants know if that thesis changes. But I don't see oil going to 60 or 70, at least in the next 12 to 18 months.
So I have to ask the difficult, controversial question with China. There are 2-3 questions around China that I'll bunch together. Some of them are related to our Greater China Fund, so we'll skip the fund questions. But 2 questions: outlook on investing in China, and if we start a trade war with China, how will it play out for us as India?
Okay, very good questions. So thanks for asking them. I think they're intelligent questions, which I think any investment rational will have to answer. So let me just break that answer into 2 theses. One is, China has built enough manufacturing capabilities over the last 20 years, right? You cannot take away that capability even for the foreseeable next 2 years. Even if we start, building factories to that scale and the technological know-how from a manufacturing base, it will take us a long time to kind of compete or even get to at par or win the narrative against companies who want to kind of deviate away from China. So it's going to be a slow grind. It's not as if tomorrow someone decides and they move. So Vietnam did a pretty good job as well from a Southeast Asia perspective. Unfortunately, we lagged. But having said that, I think yes, I think probably China has seen a peak from the view that the anti-China slogan is at the peak right now. Maybe that kind of gets accelerated in the next couple of months. What they're doing against Hong Kong also will probably play against them. But China as an investment rational versus me as a political person or a anti-China person is different, right? So I'm very patriotic. That doesn't mean that if there is an investment thesis in China, I would be negative towards that. There are 2 different aspects to that. I think China will provide tremendous value. They have looked after a lot of the structural issues. Like what we had the NBFC crisis, China had their own shadow banking problem, which to me they've solved in a very in a effective manner. And the yuan has been, if you look at the yuan versus the US dollar and gold, yuan is a 12-year low. So that also thesis plays into their angle that it is, to my mind, still a managed currency. Right, and they will play that game. Yes, they are having issues versus the Koreans and the Japanese, and everybody wants to take their manufacturing base away. But as I said, it's going to take a lot of time. And let's not forget that there are also 1.2 or 1.5 billion people that are the same demographic and kind of a similar investment rational thesis. So I am bullish China, and if I were to put a number to that, and if you look at I look at always from a risk equity premium. If I look at the HSCI right now and from a China perspective, I think you can make about 7.5% from equity risk premium versus, and you'll probably make another 2.5% from a dividend yield perspective. So you're looking at a 10% CAGR in the next few years. And that to me is a very solid return versus US treasuries that are probably going to give you negative or 0%, right? And yeah, I'll stop there. I'm still remains very bullish on China.
And thank you for separating both of them. So if you could put on your India hat now and your India research hat, obviously everyone has seen Q4 results, Shiv. What are Q1 results going to look like, and will there be a massacre in markets after Q1 results? How should investors think about Q1?
So if if anybody's been hearing the commentary coming out of the Q4 results, I think you can safely assume a lot of it is getting priced in that Q1, the markets don't care, right? Would I care if an auto company came out and said that they have had 0 sales? No, right? I mean, that's something that market participants have already factoring in. As I said in my opening thesis, equity markets are a forward-looking mechanism, right? They are looking at growth, whether it comes back in the Jan 2021 quarter, right? So maybe the next 2 quarters are a washout. What is important is that, is there enough cash flow and liquidity and balance sheet strength that companies have to overcome this hiccup and the challenge that is faced? Are there going to be the liquidity crisis that they are facing? Is that going to equate to an insolvency crisis from just being solvent in the next couple of months, right? That's the question. And if there is a thesis on a company where you feel that no, there is a question mark on the business model or the way how things are going to evolve, then of course, that's probably getting factored into markets and they're lagging already. But where there is a rationale that there is going to be a bounce and there are good quality management companies, good capital allocators that are proven for the last 10, 12, 15 years, they're getting the benefit of doubt and investors are happy owning them given the bargain sale that happened in the last, 2 months.
The next question is on US markets, Shiv. This is one a little detailed. And it says that, given that this is a liquidity driven rally, it's front loaded and over some time, maybe Fed will, also exhaust the stimulus. How do you think US markets would do? Should investors allocate to US markets? Some comments around the high deficit and valuations. So, broadly a comment on US equities for an Indian investor.
So as I said, I think, right now the markets are factoring in the liquidity surplus, right? And the fact that, Powell keeps coming out with 60 minutes on in terms of the interview that he gave. I'm not sure which channel, CNN or irrespective of that. Every time there's a blip, the central bankers come out and say, you know what, we are behind this, we will pump in more. And the famous saying is, which everyone on this call knows, don't fight the Fed. I would extrapolate that and say that don't fight any central bank that has the ability to print money, right? Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean emerging markets like India because we don't have that ability. But from a US perspective, I think for the next couple of months, the narrative remains strong. It also depends on two things. One is on 31st July, what's that date? Does the Fed continue with the PPP and the bailout money that is coming into everyone's bank account? And two, how does the Trump versus Biden war in that case, play out? Which candidacy in the polls shows up with what policies? But yes, you must understand that while a company is just the result of the cash flow that it will generate over the next 10, 15, 20 years, and the economy is the same. So if you are having and extrapolating that into what the markets have done in the last 2-3 months, as the Fed kind of starts tapering off the liquidity, which is almost like in March, I said it was $75 billion a month, a day. It has now come back to like, 45, and it'll probably go down to 10, 15, 20 in the next couple of months. What that means is that people start factoring in that, yes, we have also taken away a lot of the future growth that we were pricing in. And that also takes away from the premium that equity markets would have given over the next 10 years. So yes, is there a question that should this have been the norm? And this is, philosophical debate, which every market guru that I follow is also grappling with, right? So, Stanley Druckenmiller came out and said that, this is probably the toughest environment he's faced because, he's up like 4% versus, S&P is up like 40% from the bottom because, he said that it seems to me this is all going to blow up in your face, right? So yes, there is a narrative but does that play out in the short term or over a long period of time? Or, we've been talking about this since post GFC, and Radhika would know this, and a lot of people who are, who've been watching markets that, we've been talking about, basically kicking the can down the road, right? And as I said earlier, versus the Great Depression, the question central banks and the grapple is with, do we let companies become insolvent and let a recession become a depression, or we provide the liquidity now and let it become a prolonged recession, or at least have a flip back into a growth model where at least we don't have the pain in terms of unemployment and the structural issues that a depression brings. So those are tough questions to answer. I don't have the answer to that, but at the moment it seems that the central banks are willing to pump in as much as required.
So Shiv, two last questions I'll take. The first one, and there's a part for you and part for me here. Since you mentioned emerging markets are likely to do well, which markets are likely to do well? A couple of people are asking if we offer any funds that allow you to take exposure to emerging markets. We do offer two. We offer an emerging markets fund and an ASEAN fund that includes some of the countries like Vietnam that were mentioned in the question. But Shiv, over to you for the comment on emerging markets and any specific markets.
Sure. So just for the benefit of everyone here, I think our wealth team and is looking at some products. As our narrative gets more and more bullish on, so I'm not saying emerging market will start out forming just yet. I am saying that that's a thesis for this decade, right? And I really feel that from 2021, 22 onwards, emerging markets per se will be the darlings of the investment community yet again. With that in mind, we are looking at products that we can bring to retail participants such as yourself. And watch this space. It is something that I deeply kind of involved in as well. The tech fund is one example. We were very bullish on the tech fund, and Radhika is talking about it, and the investment returns that's been providing. That was also formed from a thesis that we believed in that proposition. So in terms of markets that will do well, I am very bullish on Russia, as I mentioned. I'm also bullish on some of the ASEAN countries like Vietnam, on Taiwan. I think Taiwan will do exceptionally well. They have managed the COVID part extremely well. And just so for the benefit of all the women audience here, the 5 countries that have managed the COVID the best, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Germany, and so, are actually all led by women leaders. And that's commendable. That's such a strong correlation. Having said that, I think in coming back to my emerging market answer, I think China, I still bracket as that as emerging market to me. Vietnam, Russia, Taiwan, India are probably, I would stay away from Brazil at the moment. That is not in my thesis. And maybe 1 or 2 countries in Eastern Europe as the things stabilize there. I've been watching it very closely, whether it's Turkey or Greece. But I think they have done a phenomenal job in terms of the fiscal prudence and what ECB has put on them in the last 2-3 years. But we are looking at a product which we will come to market with.
Okay, so last question, and I can't believe this. You'll enjoy this question. It's like a coffee with Karan question for a Friday evening. If I gave you a crore,
like a beer with the audience on a Friday evening.
No, it's got rum with Radhika actually, Shiv.
Okay.
But if I gave you a crore to invest in foreign markets, and this is not my question, this is someone's question, for the next 10 years, how would you allocate it between US, China, and the rest of the markets? And you can't put that in India. And I'm giving you the crore.
US, China, and emerging markets.
And the rest of the world, yeah.
Okay. So as I said, my EM basket would look slightly different to what is the definition of from the world. So I would ignore LATAM, right? I would be in if I were to exclude LATAM, I would put, for this decade, I would put 40% or even 45% in EMs. I would put 30% in China and the balance in the US markets. But 2 years down the line, I would actually flip that from US into EMs as well.
Superb. So thank you so much, Shiv. We'll wrap up here exactly 6:30 on the dot. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you everyone for logging in and being such a wonderful audience through a fairly technical set of sessions. Thank you, Shiv, for covering essentially the whole world for us in an hour. That's pretty impressive. And we look forward to you engaging with us again on Edelweiss AMC's Connect series.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for dialing in. I just want to say, stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive. That's the only thing that matters in life, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks a lot, Shiv. We'll end right here.
Thanks, Radhika. Take care.